Welcome to Legal Training for Navy JAG, serving as Special Victim Counsel representing child victims of sexual assault, co-sponsored by the ABA Center for Children and the Law and the ABA Center for Professional Development. Moderating the program today is Anne-Marie Lancourt. Anne-Marie is the Associate Director and Director of State Projects at the ABA Center on Children and the Law. Anne-Marie, please proceed with today's program.
Thank you so much. Joining me today on the program is Stephen Kelly, who's an attorney in Baltimore, Julie Keniston, and Dr. Joanne Solchany. Stephen is a member at Silverman, Thompson, Slutkin & White, LLC. Julie is a consultant located in Cincinnati, Ohio, and Joanne is a psychologist located in Seattle. Before each of our speakers speaks, I will be going over their bios so that you can hear who's going to be joining us on the phone today. I do want to thank all of you who have called in and joined us today on this webinar for Navy, who represent, who are Special Victims Counsel representing child victims of sexual assault. We realize that a lot of you are joining in either during your day or late in your evening, and so we do appreciate all of you taking the time to join us. So thanks again. We look forward to hearing your questions. I would like to be clear that your questions actually, when you, we'd encourage you to submit them online on your computers if you can, and anything you do, you don't have to, we won't identify who they're from. We'll just be using the question unless you want us to identify where they're from. If for some reason your computer, you're not able to access in, please, you can call in afterwards. We will have a question and answer session at the end of the program as well. So with it, I'm going to turn it over to our first speaker. Dr. Joanne Solchany is currently practicing in the Seattle area. She is an affiliate faculty at the University of Washington, a nurse practitioner in child and adolescent psychiatric nursing, and an infant mental health specialist specializing in family issues. She wrote the award-winning book, Promoting Mental Health During Pregnancy in 2001. I would like to welcome Dr. Solchany and turn it over to her. Thank you.
Thank you, and welcome. Okay, so I am going to be talking to you about child development this morning. I have a couple of some preface here. Child development is a progression, so a lot of the things I'm going to tell you, kids can kind of vary a lot. It's kind of thinking about a continuum. When we have children in trauma, and that's what many of you are going to be working with, trauma can derail development. It can cause regression, so that means they're going backwards in development. That can be temporary, and a good example of that is when a family has a new baby, the older kids can regress a little bit, want to, use the baby bottle, want to get in mom and dad's bed, may, become more clingy and things like that. So, and that's usually temporary, but even an event like that can cause some regression. When we see severe regression, especially with kids who have been dramatically traumatized, we can see things like a return to wetting the bed, even soiling their pants. And then to get even worse with kids who are chronically traumatized, we often see kids who shut down and fail to progress. So as I'm giving you these, I just want you to keep in mind that when you're working with kids who've gone through trauma, that even though they're supposed to be doing something in the preschool range, that you may be seeing 2-year-old behaviors in them instead of the 4-year-old behaviors. Most kids, though, when they have really good care, when they have a loving, trusting caregiver, those kids, despite terrible things that might happen in their life, can do very well and get through it pretty easily. Well, not easily, but they can get through it and be very successful, and the events that happen just don't overwhelm them like we might think they would. So I've divided them into these domains: psychological, affective, cognitive, behavioral, risks, and the court connections. Now, I don't have time to go over every slide. I think I gave you like 60 slides, so you'll have them to kind of go back, and I did divide things up so that hopefully you'll be able to see them easily. So I'm going to start with infancy, and that's about birth through about 12 or 14 months. So psychologically, infants are totally dependent on their caregiver. Their caregiver is really kind of like the gatekeeper for what happens in their lives. It's the caregivers who decide who the infants are exposed to, who's taking care of them, what kind of information, to what kind of food they might get. So they're really dependent on this caregiver. So psychologically, they're looking for infants developmentally need a sense of trust and safety. They need consistency and predictability. They need their basic needs to be met, and they need containment when they get distressed and help regulating. These are the times when they're really learning that. Infants should be able to take their caregivers for granted. It should just be there. It shouldn't have to be something they have to fight for. Infants, magic happens. They're learning a sense of cause and effect. And it's all about me. Even an infant, in their own way, really thinks the world revolves around them, which is how it should be when you're an infant. Affective are the feelings, the emotions, and they begin with basic feelings of joy and distress. I mean, you see babies who are starting to smile very early, and they respond to those kinds of things. Distress, a baby, it doesn't have to be, it can be a dirty diaper, it can be a scary sound. But what we want to see is a parent who can comfort them with that. So as time goes on, their affective range increases. By a year, they're demonstrating a lot of different emotions. Extremes of feelings can be overwhelming, so even too much excitement can cause a meltdown. They have a very strong ability to sense the feelings of others. So if you have a panicky, upset parent, you tend to have a panicky, upset infant. Developmentally, they're supposed to connect with that parent emotionally, so it's not surprising. But again, if you have parents who are in distress all the time, that can leak over onto the baby, and then you have a baby who's really dysregulated, who's not sleeping and having a lot of difficulty. And any need for emotional connection should be met with the appropriate support and comfort. One of the main pieces that we see in development is emotional mirroring at this age. And this is really kind of what I talked about, that connection to the parent emotionally. Babies are wired to be searching for that emotion, and so they tend to mirror what they see. And that's important, again, to remind parents that they're being copied, that this is all being taken in by the infant. Cognitively, events that occur do not take on the same meaning as they do for adults. They don't have the words or the sophistication to make sense of it the way we might sense it or an 8-year-old might sense it. But they, they're starting to get the pieces of that. It's laying the foundation. They don't understand right and wrong. Things just are. If things occur in the context of a trusted relationship, again, it can take on a different meaning. And they have a strong sense of support, and familiarity helps mitigate any of that, the impact of that trauma. Physiological, I just want to point this out too. Infants and any child really has they have a major sense of wanting some control over what's happening. With infants, they don't have a lot of control except kind of where their biorhythms are, like eating, sleeping, elimination, and regulation. And those of you who've had babies or been around babies, a good example is you're rushing to get out the door, you're trying to get moving in the morning, you've got your baby ready to go to daycare or wherever you're going, and that's when the baby decides to poop its pants or it spits up down your shirt. So those kinds of things, it's not like I'm purposely going to do this. It's kind of more like an automatic response to all of this, what they're sensing is chaos, and these kinds of actions slow things down. I mean, you have to go change your shirt, so you're slowing down. You have to go change the baby. So those are areas that, we can't force a child to eat if they are refusing unless we go to extreme measures. Same thing with sleep. You can make them stay in bed, but you can't make them sleep. And elimination is that, kids can make themselves vomit. And regulation is just those emotional ups and downs. In babies or toddlers or preschoolers, it often comes out as tantrums if they're upset. The impact of trauma, again, it derails development. There's regression. It interferes with those regular routines and consistencies. It creates interruptions, emotional deregulation, and there can be new fears or an increase in response to fears and separation anxiety. Long-term trauma, again, it's interfering with that relationship that developmentally they need to be developing a healthy attachment relationship. And if trauma is happening, that's often interfered with. So again, a lack of primary caregiver, disruption of routines, and exposure to conflict can be very damaging to their whole sense of self that's also in development. The court connections, I'm not going to go through all of these. These are just ideas for how to involve the child at different ages in the court process. So those are just for your reference. So toddlers, about 12 to 14 months through 3 years. The key is really when they kind of start toddling along, when they kind of start walking. That's how I kind of see it. And again, these are kind of arbitrary just for our thinking purposes. Other people might see things or label things differently, but it's the progression that's the important piece. So toddlerhood, psychologically, they do believe they are the center of the world. It's mine, everything you have is mine, everything she has is mine, and you can't have any of mine. It's all about me. There is cause and effect in play. They are learning. If I throw something over there, it's going to hit something. But it vacillates with magic. A lot of magic can happen. Things just appear, and they respond well to that. They're differentiating relationships. They can, they know auntie from caregiver, from grandmother, and they can maintain some connection even after long absences. Like if grandma lives out of town and she comes to visit, it oftentimes doesn't. If it's a positive relationship, it doesn't take much time for them to really relish being with grandma again. They are starting to put words to their experiences, and they're trying to have control over separation and connection with others. So they can do this stoic ignoring of people when they're mad, and they can do a lot of clinging. Excuse me. Emotionally, grief responses can be intense and impact developmental progress. So if kids are removed from a caregiver, even if it's been a bad situation, it can still be overwhelming and there can be a lot of grief. So sometimes we have to do some work with helping them around that. Again, their affective range should be expanding. They express pride over accomplishments and abilities. Most 2- and 3-year-olds, if I come into the home for a home visit, excuse me, they are bringing me all of their favorite toys just to show me. And then they can do their tricks. A lot of ta-das, those kinds of things. Those are important to them. But they still heavily depend on caregivers to help them regulate themselves around emotion. Cognitively, it's only a beginning capacity for that right and wrong, and it's usually limited to very basic, concrete things like hot, no, don't touch, no hitting, no biting. And then when you get a hug, it can feel good and help you heal. They tend to repeat things and attempt to make sense of them. And developmentally, repetition is what helps lay down different connections in their brain. So when something happens every day, like they're getting nicely tucked into bed, then that's the expectation, and they learn how to do that. And you often see kids mimicking those nurturing behaviors. They have very rapid learning periods at times, and again, they're mirroring things. Behaviorally, we see an increase in tantrums. Kids at this age can be very clever, and they begin to find and play on loopholes. Purposeful behavior takes shape. They can be incredibly stoic and not do what you want, be very kind of, pig-headed and not want to do things. They, again, like to show off. And they act out and test limits. They'll see how far they can go. This is where you tell them not to touch, so instead they put one finger there and look for your response. Their internal controls are still under development, so that's something we want to be working with. This is when we really help them learn impulse control. Risks, again, the inadequate support, the inconsistency. They're easily stressed by a lot of separations and disruption. And it's important because if there's some kind of separation involved from a parent, even when they have visitation, you can have kids that act out more with the visitation because they're so distressed over the separation, and then you can have kids who act out over the separation because they're upset with that particular parent. So it's not always easy to kind of figure things out because things are always can be a jumble in their heads as well. And again, easily overwhelmed by emotional extremes, and that means good feelings as well as negative. And if you think about and this goes through the next several years of development into school age. So something like a birthday, it's not unusual for kids to get so hyped up about their birthday that the party starts and they have meltdowns and end up in tears. Holidays can be a hard time for that too. Stress can also interfere with the development of their own sense of self and self-reliance. Court connections will skip. Preschool, 3 to 5 years old. Psychologically, they're doing more identification with the same sex, increased abilities to self-regulate. Their play is expanding. They can be imaginative. They can balance between relationships, and so like help me and I want to do it. Those kinds of things. And they like to keep control by maintaining routines. Preschoolers are good at saying, that's not how my mom does it, or that's not how my teacher does it, that's not how my dad does it. And they're developing social norms and rules. Feeling-wise, they lack the intellectual capacity to decipher complex emotions, especially when there's a lot going on. Again, they're soaking up these emotions, so when there's too much going on, they can't sort them out. So they can be, again, easily overwhelmed. But they are beginning to differentiate those nuances between frustration and anger. They can start, figuring that out. And again, oftentimes you see a lot of what they're working out through their play. Cognitively, they're very present-focused, concrete thinking, understand simple concepts. They don't really get risks. And they can usually remember events, but they're related and relate the narratives, but they're easily suggestible. Behaviorally, they ask questions and make demands when feeling out of control. Again, a lot of tantrum behavior. They can act out more aggressively with others, and play and pretending become ways of coping with the world. Risks, the same kinds of things. School age. Again, early school age is kind of like 5 to 6 years old, kind of kindergarten, first grade. So it's when they're making their transition, oftentimes to being away all day and being in more organized kinds of settings. They're still working on distinguishing reality and fantasy, so threatening kids about Santa Claus at this age can be very effective because they're still, they don't want to take a risk that they could be wrong even if they're starting to put the evidence together. They're beginning to identify their sexual identification. There's an increased ability to know people still exist even when they're not physically there, so they can think about their parent or their sister or whoever when they're at school when they get distressed instead of having to be there with them. They know that when they come home that parent's going to be there. So, again, they can think about them even though they're not physically there. They're better able to distinguish between feelings, thoughts, and actions. They're expanding attachments. They should be developing, a core group of friends, develop a relationship with their teacher, the neighbor, whoever, but they're starting to expand those. They have a better understanding of relationships between people and between concepts. They're expanding feelings. The feelings are, the range of feelings are expanding as well as their abilities to express them. Distress sometimes can be really impulsive. They can hit or, again, have a tantrum. Regression can occur when they're upset or worried. And they develop the ability to close off some feelings while dealing with others. So they're able to hold two emotions at the same time. And the example I like to use is if you're at the park or something, they're playing with their friend. You say, okay, 5 more minutes and we're going to go. The child gets upset and is mad at you that it's time to go, and they can tell you that and be mad at you, and you say, well, you're wasting your 5 minutes, and then they can drop the anger, go back and have a good time with their friend, and then they stomp off to the car. So that's being able to hold two emotions at the same time. Cognitively, again, it's increasing in complexity. They get very curious about why things happen and how they work. They're still very suggestible, but they are a little better at recalling, but they can often, this is often the age where I get, especially in my practice, a lot of pretty wild stories. For instance, just the other day I had one of my 5-year-olds tell me he was riding a moose in his backyard. We don't even have moose in Seattle, so. They understand rules and social conformity better. Oftentimes when you're dealing with something, you can just say, well, you know, the rule is, and they accept it. And there's an increased influence and impact by the media and pop culture. Behaviorally, they're just demonstrating more defensive behaviors. So they're, you know, they can protect themselves. They can use a lot of denial, a lot of I didn't do it, you know, those kinds of things. Distress of any kind is often acted out behaviorally, and again, often to the person they trust the most. So, but where do most of us kind of let everything out? It's kind of with the people we love and the people at home. So, I mean, again, that's a skill. We don't have a meltdown at work, but we might get home and just kind of, you know, crash for the evening. And kids need to do the same thing. If they can hold it together in school, they'll often have kind of everything fall apart once they get home because they know there's people there who can help them put it back together. School performance can be disrupted. There's a desire for control, so they get sneakier. Risks are the same kinds of things, court connections. This is school age. On my slides, I sent them in the wrong order, so psychologically, so you'll get my intro slide in a second. Psychologically, again, you're seeing increased ability to plan, increased levels of confidence. They should be able to become more independent, take more responsibility for their actions. Again, there's a lot of self-blame. Even if they know that they weren't to blame, they still feel guilty often, and they search for outside sources to meet their needs. So if they're not getting what they need at home, they'll often seek it out from a neighbor or a teacher. As they get to the end of this range, which is 6 to 12, grade school, so the end of it is kind of when puberty comes. Here's my intro slide. Cognitively, there's increased reasoning capacity, so there's a lot of kind of trying to negotiate, but they know the rules. They're better at keeping thoughts to themselves and sharing with peers rather than adults. Behaviorally, again, you can see some rebellion start. They should be in more peer relationships. They're testing limits. They're expressing, sometimes their stress gets expressed by somatic complaints, and again, regressive behavior. So a lot of tummy aches and headaches. One thing to check is often if they're a frequent flyer at the nurse's office at school. Again, the same kinds of things with risks and court connections. And this is kind of just one slide on normal sexual development. Preschool, there's a body curiosity. They often try to touch parents. They're really interested in genitals. It's also bathroom and toileting interest. Early school age, again, it's an increase in modesty. You know, sometimes there's sexual talk or slang. They'll hear things and use it for shock value. Masturbation, which can be, you know, that can happen at a lot of the ages. And, you know, they might do some peer exploration, playing doctor kind of stuff. They often have a lot of questions about procreation. Later school age, their increased interest and curiosity about sexuality, again, masturbation, sometimes some beginning experimentation with peers, and an interest, again, about things that are kind of coming from the pop culture. Pre-adolescent, 12 to 14, that's kind of middle school, junior high, and I know I have to finish up here, so I'll hit the highlights because you have all of this. They are very loyal, and their loyalty may impact their rational thought. So if they're upset, if they need to be loyal, they don't. They might not tell things. Cognitively, they're testing out things. Risks increase with sexual acting out and drug abuse, those kinds of things. Also cutting, we're seeing a lot of that. Adolescence is 14 to 19 or high school. Again, we should see rapid gains in self-confidence, better decision-making. Adolescent, they want to know that what they're saying is important. I think I messed this one up too. Let's see. Risks, there's a fine line between compliance and independence, so they test that. And final tips. Avoid too much information. Answer questions honestly, but within developmentally appropriate limits. Clarify that the court does not equal the truth. Someone can go free even if there's not enough evidence. And they may focus on the need to test. If you focus that the need to testify or be a witness can be a duty as a citizen, that can help them kind of come to terms with that. And that not to promise feelings of recovery to come out of court participation. So I'm going to end there.